This is Siamack Salari from Ethos and also Everyday Lives. Ethos being an ethnographic mobile research platform, or a qualitative mobile research platform, whichever way you want to see it. And today's talk is all about farmers versus hunter-gatherers in the context of research. Now, it just so happens that in 2008, a couple of years after I started my blog called Ethnostacker, which was all about interviewing different people in our industry, in 2008 I had lunch with John Griffiths, a really good friend of mine, and asked him all sorts of questions. He's one of those people where if I want to know what my opinion is on something, I actually go and ask him what it is, and he tells me, and he is just such an incredibly bright guy. And we were talking about online and going online and doing online research. And he put a really interesting idea in my head. He said, look, we're approaching a kind of a crossroads or a fork in the road where the old distinction of kind of qualitative versus quantitative research is being replaced by apples, wild apples, and apples in orchards that come from orchards, meaning that you have respondents who are carefully recruited and screened and segmented and used in research versus people who are just out there who are much more difficult to get, but when you get good ones, they're far, far better than anything you can get from a screened respondent. Or wild apples can taste, they can also have wormholes in them and be rotten, but when they're good, they're much, much better than apples taken from orchards. And this was a really, really interesting idea. At the time, I wasn't even working on any mobile research platform, but when we started working on it, all of these ideas started to come together. Let me just give you a little bit of background as to why this distinction is actually quite important. Research industry traditionally has always been about controlled research, industrial scale research, carefully recruited respondents. Yet the kind of wild fruit that we're describing, this is the ordinary people out there. They're everywhere. They're on social networking sites. They're blogging. They're in your next door home, and it's relatively straightforward now, especially online, to filter out the good from the bad. And the good, as I've already said, can be extremely good, much, much better than anything else that we've seen before. And mobile research will now allow hunter-gatherers to make a comeback over farmers. I hope I'm making sense with my analogies, but I think they're really nice analogies. And the other thing is that hunter-gatherers work very, very differently from farmers, and they don't really sit comfortably alongside one another. In other words, mobile research can go down two routes. One is the kind of controlled respondents, screened, versus going out and about and just capturing events and happenings that happen spontaneously. Let me take you to my next slide, which is to try and blow away a few myths about mobile research that I certainly hear all the time. I'm both an ethnographer and a practitioner as well as a respondent. I've been a respondent of mobile research tools enough times to know what they're good for and what they're not good for. Let's just go down two routes. The first one is participant observation. Now, participant observation is a researcher going into someone's house and conducting ethnographic observational research. It's very powerful because you can actually take a video camera and let it roll. Whereas when somebody is doing a self-ethnography or an auto-ethnography with a mobile research tool, the difference is that they are actually filming specific events. They're doing shows and tells. it's kind of prompted tasks and questions which they are responding to. Whereas an ethnographer can literally let the camera roll and let things happen naturally. So there's no disruption, there's no asking questions, there's no kind of affecting people's behavior. The other thing with somebody who's doing an autoethnography, which is really important and actually raises an interesting additional layer of research, is people are self-editing. They're self-editing the content that they're capturing, whether consciously or unconsciously, which sets into motion a whole new layer of thinking and interpretation, which is that the decision to show you what they're showing you becomes data in itself. In other words, that must also be explored. And that is actually something quite unique to mobile autoethnographies. With participant observations, very often we don't even tell respondents what we're there to do. So there's no danger of actually stimulating performances, biasing people's behavior towards particular products or brands. Whereas it's not going to be the same thing. We need to tell people what we are interested in, and there is always the risk of performances. There's always the risk that they're going to show you things that they're doing to make sure that you get value as somebody who's paying them for the research that's being carried out. That is always an issue. Whereas with us, when we used to go in home and film with video cameras, we would just let the camera roll. So there's also the additional issue of when you are in control of the camera, when you are filming respondents, there's no respondent fatigue at all. Obviously, a lot depends on the temperament of the researcher. You can't hold the camera in someone's face the whole time. But if you know exactly when and where to switch off and to switch on and to engage and to disengage, to let people go about their own lives in a relaxed way, it's really is far more effective sometimes than getting a respondent and saying we need 3 or 4 tasks a day from you on these topics. And let me give you an example. I recently did a study where I decided to capture everything that I ate on my iPhone. The problem was that it got to the point after about 5 days where it was actually so irritating for me to have to capture everything that I snacked on that I stopped snacking. Because I knew that if I went to the fridge, I would have to pick up my iPhone and take a picture of what I was snacking on. And I just couldn't be bothered to do it, so I wouldn't go to the fridge. These are the sorts of things that occur. These are the sorts of things that can happen. So having said that, mobile ethnography has extremely powerful benefits. We've got the platform, we're marketing it, and we've got loads and loads of clients using it. So I'm in no way saying that it has any kind of major issues. All I'm saying here is that it has specific benefits, and it's not a general panacea. You need to think about where you use it and how you use it. Let me now talk a little bit about orchards and wild fruit, back to my analogy, and just talk about the differences. When you are recruiting respondents, this is under the orchards heading, whether you like it or not, once you screen them and giving them a consent form, that is a contract to behave as they have said they behave. Okay? So you are pre-instilling in them a set of things that they absolutely have to do and have to capture for us. There is a danger that they can be professional respondents. I mean, a lot of households who sit on the books of recruiters are used again and again. I mean, let's face it, that in itself is a major issue. It's transactional. Money is changing hands. Researcher needs to be that there's a feeling by the respondent that the researcher has to be given what they need and value for their time. And that comes into play and can affect the quality of data. And then the experts are the ones, in other words, the researchers are the only people who get to add the meaning. So there's no real way of engaging with or involving the respondents. Whereas with wild fruit, or with people that we can find out and about, and when I say out and about, I'm talking about random people in shopping environments, in their home environments, so there may be friends of friends or families that are filmed by a single person in the community. There is no transaction, there's no consent form as such. I'll talk about privacy in a second. And there's an absolutely minimal incentive for taking part. And also these are real people. So these are people who have not been pre-screened or have not made a contract to do a certain thing in a particular way or anything like that. And things that happen are real, they're spontaneous, they're not biased towards particular products or brands. Finally, we can emancipate them by actually involving them in the process, by later on during the research process, explaining to them what it is that we're trying to understand, and allowing them to also add meaning, not just to their own content, but to the content of other respondents who are contributing to the same project. And this is what mobile research enables us to do, empowers us to do, which is to put different respondents in the same place so they can look at each other's content, obviously with their own permissions. Let me now talk a little bit about who are these hunter-gatherers. So who are we actually hunting and gathering? Well, this is not about panels. This is not about us going and filming panels. This is about creating a bunch of people who go and film other people in their own communities. So these are not professionals. These are people who could be in full-time jobs, or they could be mums who are at home or dads who are at home during the day. Yet, in response to tasks that we set them, they will go and capture events for us and recruit or bring in other respondents who can take part in our studies. They also, one of the nice things about this is very often they're capturing the behaviors of people that they know. So they can become key informants. They can talk about what their perspective is on the behavior of this person. Are the things that they were saying making sense? Are they representative of their behavior or not? And therefore fill in a lot of the knowledge gaps that the respondent themselves can't fill in, or provide perspectives for us to explore. And they give us all the benefits of a participant observer, in the sense that they can watch things unfolding, they can let the camera roll, they don't have to tell the respondent what the study is about. And at the same time, they free us up as researchers to take this content that arrives and to really be able to focus on adding meaning and understanding to it, and looking at it from a client's perspective, with the ability, of course, to keep bouncing back between the sort of wild apples that have been gathered and the issues and the objectives that we're exploring. Next slide. Privacy and ethics is a huge issue. Now, at the moment, and we use them too, consent forms are the mainstay of most projects that are carried out. So you explain on it what the study is for, who's going to be seeing the content, and that's it. And once it's signed off, and the content that is being captured up to that point belongs to the researcher. The problem with consent forms is they don't allow for what is called mission creep. In other words, you may have had a set of objectives when you first started capturing these events, but actually as you go through the analysis and the interpretation of this data, new questions emerge, new issues emerge that you start to go through the data again to explore. And so you kind of wander off target. So the initial reasons why you were doing the project can change, and they often do change, especially with observational studies. And the respondents no longer have any way of establishing this. So in my view, there is no such thing really as informed consent. Context, mode, and attitudes change over time. People who might think they've given you informed consent at one point in the time and a place and a state of mind will change, and their situation changes, and it's too late for them to go back and ask for the content not to be used. And I can say this as someone who has conducted studies, longitudinal studies with HIV patients and their physicians in consultations with release forms. And it's hugely complicated. So informed consent gives the subject a sense of control over their personal information, or alleviates the fear that the data samples or information will be retained or used in any other unintended manner. That is what informed consent should be about, but it isn't. Now, mobile tools can change this situation around. And how can they change the situation around? Well, in a really exciting way, because we're now able to, when we capture footage of someone, to actually give them a receipt. In other words, to send them a link and say, here are all of the entries that we've captured from you. And what is more, you can look at it and retrospectively decide, remove me. I don't like this. I don't want to be in this study at all, or I don't want this image of me to be in this study. And very interestingly, over time, they can actually follow their entries. They can follow themselves, follow the films that you've captured of them, and see what's happening to them, what comments are being added, how people are coding it, what interpretation is being added over time. And at any time in the future, they can ask for their image to stop being used. So it's a really powerful way of having respondents in complete control of their content. And incidentally, experience has taught me that the more control you give respondents over their content, the more relaxed they are, the more chilled they are, the more happy they are to be themselves, to take part, to be natural. And as naturalistic as possible. My next slide is, my final slide, I guess, is, are wild apples the future? Well, you know what? We now have the potential. We have the technology in the sort of words of the $6 million man. We have the technology to allow for naturalistic, emancipatory, and collaborative research that involves the respondent and allows them to see what's happening with their data for as long as their data is in circulation. So we can therefore spend less time asking and more time watching and listening. Naturalistic events, naturally occurring, spontaneous. And we have the tools to do this both time and cost effectively. So what are we waiting for? Why don't we take this leap? This is my invitation to you, and thank you for listening. And over to you for your questions.